Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Authorities are still searching for the gunman who killed 2 students at Brown University, with the manhunt stretching beyond 72 hours as police again appealed to the public for help. Local officials said video footage shows a possible suspect wearing dark clothes and a face mask near the scene, as residents remain on edge. Australian police have charged a man with 59 offences, including a terrorism charge over the shooting at Bondi Beach that killed many, as funerals were held in Sydney, while police has confirmed an injured officer lost an eye while acting with courage during the shooting. Australian State Parliament to be recalled to pass stricter gun laws. This comes as Local Premier said the Australian State Parliament of New South Wales will reconvene next week to discuss urgent legislation on gun control in the wake of the deadly Bondi shootings and consider protest reforms. Thailand's Pheu Thai Party has named Yotchanan Vongsavat as its main prime minister candidate for the February election, as it seeks a comeback after its patriarch Thaksin Shinawatra was jailed. While Pheu Thai's support has declined, with Yotchanan, a Shinawatra nephew with limited political experience, could be a breeze of fresh air to regain support. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Addis Ababa, where he has received Ethiopia's highest honor welcome, as he starts his 2-day visit today, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali have agreed to alleviate India-Ethiopia relations to a strategic partnership. US President Donald Trump has expanded a list of countries subject to a full travel ban, prohibiting citizens from an additional 7 countries. The expanded ban goes into effect on January 1st of next year, while he has also added partial restrictions on and entry limitations on additional 15 countries. According to Pentagon statements, senior US and Chinese defense officials met in Washington from December 15th to 16th. The talks brought together US Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary Alvaro Smith and Chinese Major General Yi Jiang for the 19th annual US-China Defense Policy Coordination talks. Beijing's ambassador to Moscow, Zhang Kanhui, has said that construction is advancing on a new Far Eastern gas route from Russia's Pacific coast to China. With exports due to begin in 2027, the project will link to Russia's Sakhalin-Khabarovsk-Vladivostok pipeline system as Moscow deepens energy ties with Beijing. Now for this hour, we start with Australia. Australian police have said that a man accused of opening fire at a Jewish event on Sydney's Bondi Beach now faces 59 charges, including terrorism offences. 15 people were killed in Sunday's attack, the deadliest mass shooting in Australia in nearly 3 decades. The alleged gunman was shot dead by police at the scene. Indian authorities have identified him as Sajid Akram, originally from Hyderabad, India, who moved to Australia in 1998. Police in India say his family was unaware of any radical mindset and that he had no prior record before leaving the country. His son is alleged to have acted as an accomplice. Meanwhile, the Philippines has rejected claims it was used for terrorist training after it emerged as the attackers had traveled to the country weeks before the shooting. Investigations into the attack continue as an act of terrorism targeting the Jewish community. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you very much, Mr. Ross, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now looking at this, how might this Bondi Beach attack, how do you think this is influencing and unfolding now?
The judicial process has begun with the announcement of these many dozens of criminal charges, but obviously this is going to be a very slow process. Initial reporting says that the next court hearing is scheduled for far off in April of next year, so that's 4+ months away. And the investigators have a lot of work to do to find out about how this father and son became radicalized. When did they do it? The details of the acquisitions of the weapons and how they learned how to prepare improvised explosive devices, what they did on the trip, recent trip to the Philippines, and whether or not there was any breakdown by intelligence or police agencies. So obviously this is very, very early stages for the investigation process, and I expect that investigation process as well as the judicial process to take a very extraordinary amount of time.
Yes, and now how do you think this will be influencing, although it's all the way in April, the hearings, but how do you think this will be influencing Australia's counterterrorism policies, gun policies, particularly around prevention?
Certainly there's going to be intense debate in Australia about the path forward. The states are talking about enhanced restrictions on gun possession, and very likely there will be legislative moves, probably quickly. But there's also going to be a lot of discussion about the ability of authorities to monitor people's communications, for example. There's already announcements about giving police new authority to restrict public rallies, which the police in their discretion determine might put a strain on resources. Then there are going to be free speech advocates who push back on that, civil liberties advocates who push back on that. So like any democratic society where people have enjoyed certain rights, whether that's free speech, however offensive that speech might be, or the right to hold rallies and demonstrations, when authorities say they want to impose new restrictions on that, inevitably there will be some pushback on that.
Yes, and what political challenges might arise when acts of terrorism, like in this case, have international dimensions, such as the migration history from India in this case and overseas travel to Philippines? How should governments respond?
Certainly, there's been a pushback against inbound migration in Western countries, whether that's Australia or the countries of Europe, which have all seen an influx of migrants from the Middle East and other parts of the world. And there is a legitimate concern about radicalization and Islamic terrorism. We've seen plenty of incidents in countries around the world to know that that is a legitimate concern for security agencies, and it's a legitimate concern for communities such as the Jewish community that have been victims of Islamic terrorism in multiple places around the world. The trend right now is to restrict inbound migration. We see that in Australia, we see that in Western Europe, certainly we're seeing that in the United States as well, and that's a popular political move or a policy move to make, and that's not going to reverse itself. I would expect continued and ever greater restrictions on inbound migration from a number of countries in the Middle East or even India to places like Australia, Europe, and the United States.
Yes, 100%. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Feingold for sharing that. Now, viewers, let's listen into what the Philippine Presidential Communications Office Undersecretary had shared about the links to the Bondi gunman.
Of course, the President strongly rejects the sweeping statement and the misleading characterization of the Philippines as the ISIS training hotspot. At dahil dito ay napanayan po natin o nakausap po natin mismo ang pamunuan ng NSC at ito po ang kanilang tugon at aking babasahin. Regarding reports describing the Philippines as an ISIS hotspot, the characterization is misleading. Currently, there is no validated report or confirmation that the individuals involved in the Bondi Beach incident received any form of training in the Philippines. Philippine authorities, in coordination with international partners, continue to verify all available information but no evidence has been presented to support claims that the country was used for terrorist training.
Now we move on to UK. Britain's health minister has said that it is important to hold the BBC to high standards after US President Donald Trump filed a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against the broadcaster. West Streeting has said that the BBC's editing of a speech Trump made on 6 January was wrong and misrepresented what the president said. Trump alleges the edited clips made it appear he encouraged supporters to storm the U.S. Capitol, in accusations he strongly denies. The lawsuit claims defamation and violations of U.S. trade practice laws, seeking at least $10 billion in damages. The BBC has said it will defend the case. The broadcaster has already apologized, admitting an error of judgment, but insists there is no legal basis for the lawsuit. Let's listen into what West Streeting has shared.
The BBC is one of the most trusted news sources, not just in this country, but the world over. And in corners of the world where democracy is threatened and tyranny thrives, it is the BBC World Service that provides that free, independent, high-quality journalism that otherwise would not be available. And that's why it's important to hold the BBC to high standards, and why when the BBC falls short of those high standards, they're accountable.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now looking at this, how should governments, balance holding media organizations like BBC accountable now with protecting press freedom, especially in cases involving such high-profile political figures like leader of another nation, in this case Trump? Do you think apologizing is sufficient?
We spend time this.
Well, apologies might not be sufficient. Just giving Donald Trump an apology is not going to cause him to drop the litigation. If the BBC wants the litigation to conclude, they're going to have to offer up a settlement, just like several other American media outlets settled with Donald Trump by paying him a substantial amount of cash. Of course, that amount of cash is far less than President Trump initially asked for in that litigation. But there is a more broader issue here, and that is the standards that media like BBC actually adhere to. And it's one thing to talk about what their internal policies are and what they hope to achieve in their reporting, and that they're neutral and all those nice things. But there are media organizations with a pattern of not just biased reporting, but flawed reporting, incorrect facts, things like that. The BBC, frankly, has had a number of scandals in recent decades related to some of their on-air personalities, as well as things that go on behind the scenes. This is clearly an organization with a credibility crisis, and they have to admit that and try and figure out how to save this organization, because frankly its reputation is not what it used to be. And any state broadcaster, even in the Western democracies, where many of the governments do actually own and operate media outlets, they all face those concerns about political interference and biased reporting as well. But when it comes to the BBC, there clearly is a pattern of problems that, despite every time an issue arises, the politicians and who's ever in charge of the BBC at the moment says we're going to fix it, they apparently cannot.
Yes, and what are the potential political and diplomatic implications of now U.S. President suing a foreign public broadcaster, BBC?
That's a really good question, because Prime Minister Starmer has actually developed a pretty good working relationship with President Trump, notwithstanding that President Trump is right of center and Starmer is left of center. So ideologically, they're starting from two very, very different places, and they don't agree on a lot of social issues, for example, or on green energy and climate change as another example. But it seems that they have a good relationship so far, and they've been able to negotiate trade specifically, but President Trump is going to look at the BBC as an arm of the British government, and the guy in charge of the British government is Prime Minister Starmer. So we should watch closely whether or not there will be a breakdown in the relationship between the two leaders. Also keeping in mind that Prime Minister Starmer's poll ratings are atrocious. And President Trump knows that. So President Trump is certainly not shy about criticizing other leaders or media outlets whose ratings are falling, whose popularity is falling. So is President Trump going to become a vocal critic of Prime Minister Starmer as a result of this incident and this lawsuit is definitely something to monitor.
Yes, indeed. We will be eyeing that. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Ross Feingold for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now, moving the focus to Africa, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on an official visit to Ethiopia, the first by an Indian Prime Minister in more than a decade. Modi was welcomed in Addis Ababa by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, marking a milestone in ties between the two countries. During talks, India and Ethiopia elevated relations to a strategic partnership with discussions covering trade, technology, defense, health, and capacity building. Modi has also announced a decision to double scholarships for Ethiopian students in India. The Indian leader later addressed a joint session of the Ethiopian parliament, highlighting shared democratic values, civilizational links, and global South cooperation, as the visit reinforces India's engagement with Africa and BRICS partners. Let's listen in.
Your Excellency, Your Excellency, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Honorable Speakers of both Houses of Parliament, Honorable Members, Excellencies, and my dear sisters and brothers of Ethiopia. It is a moment of a great privilege for me to stand before you today. It is wonderful to be here in Ethiopia, the land of lions.
Now we move on to South America. The United Nations Chief Volker Turk has urged the unconditional release of all people arbitrarily detained for their activities in civic space in Venezuela. While addressing the UN Human Rights Council, Turk has said that crackdown on civic space has intensified in the country. Let's listen into what Volker Turk has shared.
That it was foreseen. I have myself been engaged with the Venezuelan authorities in order to resume our activities, but unfortunately without success. Obviously, we would like to ensure constructive engagement in the future, but at this stage, unfortunately, we are not able to do this on the ground under the current circumstances.
Meanwhile, Samuel Moncada, permanent representative of Venezuela to the United Nations, has stated that Venezuela has denounced the United Nations Security Council the theft of an oil tanker by the United States amid its anti-drug operation in the Caribbean, which is putting pressure on Caracas. Let's listen into what Samuel Moncada has shared.
El gobierno de Venezuela exige al gobierno de los Estados Unidos de América la liberación inmediata y sin condiciones de la tripulación secuestrada, la devolución inmediata del petróleo venezolano confiscado ilegalmente en alta mar. 3. El cese inmediato de cualquier acción de fuerza o interferencia contra la comercialización legal de petróleo venezolano. Asimismo, Venezuela insta respetuosamente al Consejo de Seguridad a 1. Condenar públicamente este acto de piratería promovida por un Estado, el uso ilegítimo de la fuerza militar contra un buque privado y el robo de un cargamento producto del comercio internacional lícito.
Now we move on to Europe. European leaders have launched an international claims commission for Ukraine, aiming to hold Russia and Russia financially accountable for damage and alleged war crimes stemming from its 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Meeting in The Hague, 34 countries have signed a convention establishing the commission, which will assess claims linked to losses suffered by individuals, organizations, and the Ukrainian state. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky further said that accountability is essential for lasting peace, adding that Russia must accept global rules. The Commission will build on an existing register of damage that has received more than 86,000 claims, but officials cautioned that compensation will not be immediate. How any awards would be paid, potentially using frozen Russian assets, remains unresolved. Russia denies committing war crimes and has criticized efforts to use its frozen assets. The World Bank estimates Ukraine's reconstruction costs at least $524 billion. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Rohan Gunaratne. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, what are the political and legal challenges? What are the capacity of this, particular commission that's been established in Europe? What can they realistically do?
Asuma, the commission has been established to punish Russia. So Russian assets overseas, Russian businesses overseas will be taken over, and the money and the resources from that will be used to pay compensation. So this is a very significant blow for Russia. Of course, Russia will retaliate, and this itself may even protract the conflict. So what is important to understand is that such measures are aimed at pushing Russia, pressurizing Russia, persuading Russia to come to the negotiating table with the view that there will be a resolution to the conflict. But such measures also can make Russia move to a position where it will continue to fight. So I think that the Western nations will have to be very careful in moving forward this measure, because it's really going to cripple Russia's assets overseas.
Yes, and how do you think, where are we in terms of how close are we to ceasefire, as sticking points still exist?
The Russians have very clearly said what they need. They need territorial concessions, and that is something that is a sticking point at this time. So I think that there needs to be a greater dialogue and discussion. And until then, the war will continue. Until then, lives will be lost. And of course, there will be destruction of property. But to respond to your question, this particular development of a commission is specifically aimed at getting Russia to cooperate and collaborate so that they will not pursue the option of war, but that itself may drive Russia into deeper depths of war fighting.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for highlighting that, Professor Rohan Gunaratne. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on to US, the US government has warned that it could impose fees or restrictions on European service providers in response to what it called discriminatory actions against US firms. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative has accused the European Union and some member states of using lawsuits, taxes, fines, and directives to harm U.S. service providers, while European companies like Accenture, DHL, and Spotify operate freely in the U.S. The USTR emphasized that the U.S. would use every tool at its disposal to counter these measures if the EU continues its actions. It suggested that foreign service providers could face penalties under U.S. law. This threat comes as Europe intensifies its crackdown on big tech, with recent fines imposed on platforms like Elon Musk's X and Google. In response, the European Commission rejected the accusations, asserting that EU rules are fair and equal for all companies and that enforcement is non-discriminatory. The Commission stressed that its regulations are designed to create a level playing field in line with citizen expectations, and it remains engaged with the US on trade issues. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Rohan Gunaratne. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now looking at this, where do you think this is coming from? Is this again a tit-for-tat situation between US and Europe?
Asuma, this is indeed a tit-for-tat situation. So I'll just give you one example.
Yes, thank you.
The regulators imposing a fine of 120 million euros. That is USD's 140 million on Elon Musk's X social media platform earlier in December. And we also saw the Europeans imposing Google with unexpectedly high 2.95 billion euros, that is 3.44 billion USD. So this is a tit-for-tat fight between the Europeans and the Americans. But I am very confident they are going to resolve it.
Yes, and keeping all the minds you have mentioned in mind, to what extent do these differing regulatory approaches between US and EU towards the big techs create political tension, and how should these governments balance competition, innovation, also consumer protection as we head towards a new AI competition now?
Europe needs the United States more than ever before to protect itself from the Russian threat. So I personally believe that this conflict will not escalate beyond a certain point. There will be a discussion on this and there will be a settlement. But what people need to understand is that President Trump is a businessman. He's a politician and a businessman, and he has taken this latest decision and issued a threat to Europe based on what the Europeans did to American companies.
Yes, and lastly, Professor, what are the broader implications of this, the using trade enforcement tools like the ones mentioned by President Trump as leverage in disputes over technology, regulation, and corporate compliance?
Trump is a master of trade. Trump is a master of having such positions, but the Europeans also have engaged in it. So I think that there needs to be a discussion and a dialogue and a resolution, because the fines are quite hefty. It is too much for either the Europeans or the Americans to bear. And these two blocks of countries, they have to resolve. The US and the Europeans must resolve this because there are bigger issues at stake. For instance, the Europe is currently facing a very significant threat from Russia, and they need the continued cooperation of the US. If there is a disruption in the relationship, Europe will be at risk of Russian intervention.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Rohan Gunaratne for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Well, that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.